Welcome, everyone. It's Kyla. I'm here today with Kristin, our amazing practitioner of Nutritional Revolution, and she's going to help me today dive into the top supplements that are proven in the literature to support performance, because there are a lot of supplements out there on the shelves, and many of them maybe don't have the correct dosing or maybe not even the right form of a certain supplement, and the claims they're making maybe are true based off of the supplement in the product, but the dosing or the amount is not there. So Kristin's going to help us break through the kind of myths out there too, and break down those top supplements that are proven. And then I'm going to let Kristin introduce herself here on the
Hello,
podcast.
hello. My name is Kristin Duyn, and I'm in Portland, Oregon. I got my master's degree in clinical nutrition at the Naturopathic School of Medicine here. I'm a member of the ISSN, and I'm currently studying for my CISSN credential. And I've been working with Kyla for almost 3 years now.
Amazing. Yeah. She's crushing it. She's crushing it. All right. So some of the things that we're going to look into today are going to be supplements that are looking at strength, time to exhaustion, endurance capacity, and sustaining some high intensity efforts. The majority of our clients for sure are endurance athletes. So these topics will apply. But before we dive into all that, I think one thing we want to preface this all with is, well, first, always check with your professional medical doctor before taking any supplements. I'll start with that. But when you choose a supplement, I think I just want to break down what's important to look for. And definitely if you are a high performing athlete, I think this is even more critical, especially if you are being tested in sport. I'm sure many of you have seen people get caught for doping, and many times people claim that it was fully unintentional, and I don't want to say ate a burrito, but ate a burrito was one of the most recent things that comes to mind when I think about this. But there definitely can be banned substances in supplements for sure. And so it's important that when we choose a supplement, that we choose one that has been third-party tested. And there are companies out there that are not associated with the product. So it's not a bias going on there. And they are pulling these products off the shelves and testing them. And so those will be things like NSF for sport. Then there is informed choice. And then there's informed sport. So for our maybe higher level athletes, the difference between informed choice and an informed sport is that the informed sport certification means that they are actually testing every single batch of that product before it even gets to the shelf. Whereas the informed choice, they're just doing random pulls, usually once a month from the shelf. So it's made it to the store already, and they're testing. And then I will back up and say NSF will test for 280 of our banned substances for sure, but there are more than 280 banned substances, just so you are aware. So they're testing for a vast majority of them. But keep in mind, they are not covering all of them. So the supplement industry can be a tricky one to navigate, but do check for those on your products. And I'm sure, Kristin, you have seen it as well. As many times we have clients come to us and they'll share their supplement list.
Their big supplement list.
Yes.
And yeah, just keep in mind how it's very highly unregulated, the supplement industry. So before you purchase a supplement, either at the, natural food store, grocery store, or online, just make sure you do your research, or you're working with a qualified professional that can give you good guidance. Cause, we don't want you to have, to get tested for, performance enhancing anything, and be disqualified from a sport. But also, we want to make sure what you're taking and putting into your body is quality.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and many times too, right? We'll review client supplements, and not only are they not third party tested, but I think it's easy to fall into a lot of those claims, because these days people are getting really good at marketing supplements and making them seem like they're maybe really high quality, or maybe have some scientific backing behind them.
Yeah.
And it's scary how many of them are citing literature, but when you actually read the article, I was literally just doing this before we did our podcast. I was just looking at one company's claims, and it was actually a menopause support tea. And the research they cited literally did not say anything regarding the actual claim they were making regarding what the tea was meant to do based off of X study, for example. So that's really scary. So they're just citing basically random stuff that had the same herb in it, which is
yes. And also good. One thing I'd say is be careful of those customized. The new buzz right now is the custom supplements, made for you as an individual. And, so then you're getting this supplement, one pill that's supposed to have all these supplements in there together, but you really don't know what you're getting in there. So just make sure you do your research.
100%. Another thing I will just add, and we're going to cover this in a second here, but there is a lot of bias in research, and one of them being research studies done. So it looks really good, but it's funded by the company itself. So in-house, air quotes, scientific studies done on their product, where it's very easy for things to.
Of course, it's going to be good.
Yeah. So seeing plenty of that around as well. So just something to take with a grain of salt for sure. And then the other thing we want to keep in mind with any of these supplements to moving forward that we're going to talk about is that, or any supplements you decide to choose ever, is that you choose supplements that not only are they looked at in the literature, but the population that was looked at applies to you. So if the weight loss supplement, for example, I was just reading one about EGCG, a component within green tea, and it was effective in weight loss at a specific dose, but it was only studied, for example, in this study on obese males.
Yeah, I saw that too.
So does that apply to you, whoever that person is that's looking at that? Are you obese and are you male? Something to keep in mind. So the stuff we're going to talk about today is really going to apply to athletes for sure. So all the studies that we're referencing today were done on athletes of some level, whether they're elite or not. And if they were elite, we're going to talk about that. And then men and women. So, and many of the age ranges from the studies here are going to be anywhere from 20 years old upwards. We'll cover some postmenopausal stuff too with one of our supplements. So big age ranges here. Hopefully that'll cover most of the people who are listening today, but just kind of keeping that in mind when you're pulling supplements or trying to pull research on supplements. And then before I dive into all that, I will give you guys a quick preface on studies and what kind of we want to look for in addition to, did they look at your population type, again, male, female, age range, athlete, obese, etc. But we also want to make sure it's a high quality study. So we really want to look for something that was a randomized controlled trial, ideally double blind. Ideally, there was some maybe crossover or placebo control going on. And the reason, for example, a randomized control is that this just means that when they do the study, they randomly assign the participants to either a control group or placebo group. This is really important because we don't want to just put all the healthy cyclists in the supplement group and then the overweight sedentary individuals in the placebo group, because that would obviously give us a very biased results. We probably see improvements in health markers across the board for sure in our group that's more active and more fit and focused on their health compared to those who are more sedentary. So definitely want to randomize that. And then we also want to make it double blind. And that just means that we're not going to know who got the placebo or who got the experimental supplement, right? So the researchers don't know, and the participants in the study do not know. And this is also to exclude any bias. So we don't want the researcher to know that Kristin, for example, got the experimental Beta-Alanine supplement, and that could lead me to maybe ask her more questions to lead her to certain answers or things like that when we're trying to get results from the study. Or we might push her to go a little bit harder on the treadmill test because we know, so that is absolutely biased, and we want to make sure we exclude that from the research. And then it's also helpful if they do a crossover portion of the study, which means that they, for example, I'll use Kristin and myself, if Kristin was in the placebo group and I was in the experimental supplement group, that at some point throughout the study, they would actually take us both off of those supplements, so the placebo and the experimental supplement, and then switch us. So then Kristin would be taking the experimental supplement and then I would go on the placebo. And this is to make sure that there's not genetic components and, fitness components across the individuals in the study that are affecting the results. So important that we get a high quality study. And ideally there's a large population that was looked at as well to kind of round that all out. So I think there's a couple things too we should dive into first before we talk about supplements. And you probably know where I'm going with this one, Kristin.
Yes.
But food
first.
Yes.
Food first.
I mean, if you're not nailing your nutrition, you're not consuming enough calories, you're not getting enough carbohydrates to support your efforts or protein to recover from your training, supplements are not going to do a whole lot of help for you, right? Got to nail the basics. And I think we see this a lot. Would you agree?
I do agree. I always tend to do my clients' nutritional analysis and not include supplements in there because you have the option to include. And I tend to leave out the supplements just to see where they're falling short food-wise first and see if we can match those needs. I mean, granted, there are some like vitamin D is hard to get through food. And so, there are exceptions, but a lot of nutrients we can get through a healthy diet, which will carry over to a lot of other health related issues, outside of sport as well.
Definitely. So, and the other thing I will preface to before we dive into our first supplement of the day is that many of these supplements, if you are listening to this or watching this on YouTube and you are a pretty highly trained athlete, many times supplementing with any of these things will give you kind of that like 1% improvement in your performance. But what's kind of cool for maybe those of you who are not elite athletes is that we actually see a greater improvement in performance in those who are less trained. So pros and cons a little bit to that, but just kind of keeping that in mind that if you are a high performing athlete, that if you're looking for that extra 1%, you could potentially get that from one of these supplements. But don't expect a, big 50% change after your first use of that. Right. So our first supplement that we're going to dive into today is nitric oxide. And I'm going to let Kristin break that one down for us.
Sure. Well, nitric oxide has definitely gained popularity. I think probably within the last 5 years, I've noticed a lot more nitric oxide supplements on the shelves. It started out with a few, and now if you go, you see quite a bit, especially if you Google it, a bunch of new products come up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about nitric oxide and how it works. Basically, it's an essential molecule that signals our blood vessels to relax and expand, creating greater efficiency in the body, greater nutrient delivery, greater oxygenation to every system and organ tissue in the body. So basically what that means is, we're getting more oxygen and that can in turn help improve performance. And nitric oxide has also been shown in the literature to support healthy blood pressure. So basically, when we think of nitric oxide, most of us think of beetroot. It seems to be the most popular because of its beets have such a high nitrate content in them. And it's received a lot of attention lately from competitive athletes, coaches, and scientists as basically a natural food supplement for improving exercise performance. And as a dietary compound, it's integrated with the class called polyphenols. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of polyphenols, which have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, which aid in reducing oxidative stress, cellular damage, and during times of stress. So basically that can help improve recovery. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about tart cherry, which is really high in polyphenols, and taking that at night to kind of help with relaxation and recovery. I know, Kyla, you probably
that's a great one for
about that one quite a bit.
Damage.
As well, especially before leading up to a race. So that's always a good protocol. And so how much, well, here, I'm going to dive in, I guess, to a little bit more studies that we've found. A correlation between nitrate-rich beetroot juice, so the serving size of 5 to 9 millimoles of nitrate, or about 85 grams of beets. Now that sounds like a lot. That's about a little over a half a cup of boiled beets. And it showed when taken 30 minutes prior, it improved the performance of runners and cyclists in a 5K to a 16K time trial performance. So, with runners, that could be almost up to an hour of threshold work. Awesome. And a little less for cyclists, hopefully, unless you're going really slow. But, it does show that, even for longer efforts, it can help improve performance as well, instead of just those short bursts.
Yeah. That is a handy product. I know many of my athletes have utilized nitric oxide containing products, and I think that can be, I've seen it listed as I think it's Beta-Alanes is the word. Is that
Beta-Alanes?
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it.
Yeah. I've seen it listed, on ingredients labels as Beta-Alanes, not necessarily beet juice, but I think Beta-Alanes is a component, right, of, or it's the nitrate containing component of beets. And yeah, we'll dive into, I think Kristin gave dose amount here, but the nitric oxide piece is tricky because a lot of the research, when we were even going to pull all the research, we were having a hard time like getting a true dose value that was shown to be effective, that someone from the public could just look at a package and be like, okay, this is the proper dose. This is a tricky product to do that with, because much of the literature was showing that the dose you wanted was in millimoles of nitrate, and that's not a required ingredient to list on any product or food item. And so many companies won't list it that way. They won't say, oh, this has 5 millimoles of nitric oxide. They won't show it that way, probably because it's part of their secret blend or something like that. But so that's important, I think, is where it gets a little bit tricky, is like, do you want to eat a bunch of beets before you go, or do you want to use a supplement that likely has the 5 to 9 millimoles, but it's not fully clear if they have.
Yeah. Right. I mean, if you choose a quality supplement, I think the dosage on the back should hopefully reach that, 5 to 9 millimoles. I know it equates to about 2 scoops of the popular Beta-Elite. And I know on the what I've taken is the alt red, and I think that that's totally different because they're capsules. They do tell you how many capsules to take, and you even going on there and doing your research on the website, you kind of just have to trust that it's in there. But those two are both quality companies. You do pay a little bit more for these products. However, I do think that, it's kind of one of those things for you get what you pay for.
Yeah, definitely. And so with something like this, I mean, we talked about the effects it has on improving blood flow and thus, oxygen. It's getting to the muscle tissue faster. So hopefully efforts maybe feel a little bit easier. Maybe you're not breathing as hard. How does something like this apply? We talked about dose amount, 85 grams of beets or 2 scoops of Beta-Elite. When, I know you said 30 minutes before, but should someone be using this all the time, before key sessions, just before a race? Like, what do you think for a client?
Well, the literature appears consistent in showing that 2 to 6 days or up to 15 days of supplementation can help. And so I think, instead of just taking it once a week before a session, from what I understand, it's good to take it every day leading up, especially if you have a race. So, I always kind of recommend, doing it as long as you can before a race. I mean, obviously not too long, but at least 3 to 4 weeks out prior to a key session or race. Especially if you're going to altitude, that's usually when I use it, is if I know that I'm going to go to altitude and either do like a kind of like a training camp there, or if I have a race, I'll start about 3 weeks out and, make sure I'm consistent every day, taking it 30 minets prior to my workout.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's
have you tried it, Kyla? Have you?
I'm trialing out the Beta-Alanine right now. I have not tried the Alt Red, because we are doing a team race at in Bend. So that's at elevation for us. So trying to get any advantage that I can. So we'll see. I definitely do. I have to say I do feel like, and I also see it in my Strava results, I will say I'm getting a lot more PRs when I take the Beta-Alanine before my mountain bike rides, for sure. There is something to be said with that. And so, or it could be mental, right? It could be that mental effect of it. Either way, it's working. Something's working. Yeah. So I'm going to stick with it. Fingers crossed. I'll let you know if I'm huffing and puffing when I get to Bend or not. So
but it is expensive. The quality,
definitely.
Supplements are expensive. And so I don't think you need to take it every single day for a long time in a row. I would just time it strategically before a big event, or, and if you've done that and then, in a few weeks you have another key workout, you can just take a one-off, but I don't think you need to take it consistently throughout the year, especially in the off season.
Definitely. Yeah. And we will, just a heads up too, we'll share these supplements in a little free cheat sheet. If you guys want to get that, we'll include a little link in the show notes to download a cheat sheet on the supplement we suggest, because it's NSF certified or third-party tested, the dosing amount, the effects, time to take it, etc. We'll include that in the show notes. So click that link if you want a little download on that stuff. Okay. So I'm going to dive into creatine. That is a hot topic right now. So the literature out there supports creatine in improving high intensity exercise output, and possibly some physiological adaptation. So if you think about how to get physiological adaptation, we need to push our body to a certain level of stress. So if we can push our body to that level of stress, or maybe a little bit harder, and then recover really well from it, can we get that physiological adaptation? How does creatine help us do that? But before we dive into that, I will say that there is a lot of research on creatine, and the form of creatine that has the most research backing it is going to be creatine monohydrate. So if you are looking for a creatine supplement, I would choose a creatine monohydrate, just because that has the most literature behind it. I think some of the other forms out there, which I remember now, I forgot this one yesterday, Kristin, when we were talking, is Krealkaline is the other one, other form that's out there.
Oh my gosh. I actually have not heard of it.
Yeah. I think it's, I think it's some customized molecular formula, right? Sure. But I think the claim with that one is that they say it causes like less bloating or maybe less GI issues. Some people do have GI issues with creatine supplementation, but we'll talk about different dosing ways and see how that affects you, but opt for a creatine monohydrate when you have the chance. So what I will say is that creatine monohydrate actually is something that many of us will get in our diet naturally if we are consuming animal products, because it is in meats. So many times if you just increase the amount of protein in your diet from animal sources, you're going to increase your creatine stores and that phosphocreatine synthesis, I will say. So, and that when we build up that phosphocreatine synthesis phosphocreatine stores in the muscle via synthesis, we're going to support those high bursts of intensity, because that actually metabolic pathway is the first area that our body goes to for energy to do that hard and fast effort before it starts going to glucose in the muscle, or the aerobic pathways where we're utilizing glucose and fat and things of that nature. So if we can get that first pathway that we tap into stocked up, we can potentially push a little bit harder efforts, hence the support behind the high intensity literature. So the other thing there is creatine, when it builds up the phosphocreatine stores in the muscle, you can get increases in your lean mass, and that can lend to increases in your strength and your power output. So one of the things that people get a little bit scared about is gaining weight with creatine, because it does put water in the muscle. And I will say that if you are utilizing a creatine that is not putting water in your muscle, it's not doing its job. That is the main reason why creatine, like one of the main reasons why creatine is really effective for several other things, one of them being thermoregulation. So helping, assisting, cooling your core temperature, managing body heat, etc. It's a huge thing for endurance athletes doing these long efforts, sweating a lot. If you can't thermoregulate well, or you need help thermoregulating for high heat situations, creatine can actually be a huge savior in that situation. But I think people get locked in this mindset of like, I have to be super light because then I'll be faster. But if you can sustain that duration for a longer period of time, because now you can cool yourself more effectively, this actually has been proven to be kind of the way to go actually in that situation for performance. So what the research looks at.
Another good thing is I get the question from endurance athletes a lot of like, well, do I really need creatine? It's because they think it's for, bodybuilders.
Yes.
But that's a huge benefit.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out there and you're doing, 3 to 6 to 7 hour bike rides or, endurance events, triathlons in the heat, it's a huge benefit.
Yeah, definitely. And then I'll mention too, I said there's a lot of research on creatine, but I will also say that there's a lot of research on creatine, not just on improving muscle strength and power and thermoregulation. They're looking at creatine for all kinds of stuff, and they're seeing it works for a lot of these things, which is so cool. And some of those things are like even improvements in your sleep, your moods. We're seeing a lot of research with creatine looking actually into like brain activities, right? So mood, depression, concussions.
Concussion is huge.
Yeah. It's really, it's looking to be like a pretty neat supplement to have on board. Also injuries. I mentioned thermoregulation. It's being utilized in studies looking at fibromyalgia. Pregnancy use appears to be perfectly safe and okay. Neurodegenerative diseases. So again, looking at those neurons, we talked about the brain. So there's some connection going on there with creatine, which is really exciting. And I'm curious to see what more of those areas look into and the benefits there. But for now, we're going to focus on athletes. So I'll break down a meta-analysis for you guys. So they looked at 95 different research papers on creatine monohydrate. They were assessing men and women. And they concluded that creatine increased single and repeated high intensity efforts, as well as their lean mass, strength, and power. So that's a nice study to kind of reference there. And we'll break down dosing in a second here. And then I mentioned the ability to better thermoregulate was another study we pulled. And then it also will help increase your ability to store more carbohydrates in your muscle for performance. So if you think about those long distance events, races where, glycogen supercompensation, or some people call it carb loading, is going to be critical. If we can store even more carbohydrates in our muscle, we're going to be able to avoid that bonk, delay that bonk, sustain those efforts for longer. And so if we have creatine on board to do that, that's again in our favor as well. And then I will touch a little bit here on sex differences. So there is quite a bit of research looking at creatine supplementation in women, and I'll say menstruating women first. Here's what I'll dive into. But, and reason being is that there appears to be, so creatine kinase activity is something that alters throughout the menstrual cycle, and that has an effect on our phosphocreatine stores. And so during the follicular phase of our menstrual cycle, creatine kinase activity is actually quite low. And then it peaks around ovulation, so around day 14 or halfway through your cycle, and then kind of starts to dip and trend down towards the first day of bleeding. But you're going to be lowest in that follicular phase. So they're looking into, does creatine supplementation, whether it's consistently throughout the cycle or during certain phases of the cycle, potentially help women maybe more so than men, because if they do it phase specific, because of the ability of estrogen and testosterone actually to fluctuate throughout the cycle and decrease our creatine synthesis rates, which is very interesting. So as an example here that I pulled, they said in a group that loaded with creatine for 7 days, they saw lower oxygen consumption at sub-max workload. So meaning breathing felt easier at harder efforts. And that led to a reduced work output by the cardiovascular system. And this was in a graded exercise test. And they had a placebo and a control group and a experimental group. So this was a good one to pull from and kind of see the changes there with just 7 days of loading. And we'll break down what is loading with creatine, because there are different ways to take it. But before we dive into dosing, I just want to cover postmenopausal women. And this is an interesting group when it comes to creatine supplementation, because it does appear that creatine supplementation in postmenopausal women is more effective for sparing lean mass, actually minimizing bone loss, improving strength, etc. That occurs with declining estrogen as we age, when you actually do a large dose for a short period of time. So this would be our loading phase, etc. And I'll break that down in a second here for you guys.
It's also been shown to be helpful for menopausal women with the brain fog. So it can help, reduce the side effects of brain fog is a huge side effect of, the menopause transition. And so creatine has been shown to mitigate that as well.
Awesome. Do you know if that was consistent daily dosing, or did they?
I don't know. It was from, I read a research article on, basically there's a lot of research out there now on creatine and how it helps the brain and, for a lot of issues. So I don't know I don't remember what they said about dosage or, whether they loaded or not. Cause I really dove into it after my second concussion on the mountain bike. And you definitely significant improvement when you take creatine after a concussion with recovery times. I wish I would have looked up the percentages now. But maybe we could put that in the show notes. But there's a ton of really good studies out there that show the effects on the brain.
Amazing. Yeah. The studies that I'll break down here when I talk about postmenopausal are specifically looking at lean mass and muscle strength. So the brain fog was not accounted for. So
I just had to bring that up.
Yeah. So just for those of you listening, we'll see if we can find the brain fog stats and include those in the show notes. But for purposes of lean mass and muscle strength, the dosing for postmenopausal women does appear to be 20 grams per day for 7 days. And then you stop, right? So if you're doing that for 7 days, maybe then you stay off of it for maybe the rest of the month, and then you do it again at the beginning of the next month. So it appears these kind of like larger doses and then coming off of it is a bit more effective than a sustained maintenance dose. And ideally that 20 gram dose is broken down into 4 5-gram servings. And this actually dose is very similar to the loading dose that is suggested for anybody if they want to load. And the reason for possibly loading with creatine is that you need the full effects of creatine, that the saturation of the muscle with phosphocreatine stores like in 7 days, you need it quick for an event or something like that, then you would load, and you would do the same protocol, 20 grams per day of creatine monohydrate broken down into 4 5-gram servings throughout the day. So maybe that's one with breakfast, one with lunch, one mid-afternoon, and one before bed. And then if you wanted to keep those results, moving to a maintenance dose of 3 to 5 grams per day, just consistently. And that is something where you could start with a maintenance dose. You do not have to load, but just keeping in mind that the muscle stores will likely not be fully saturated until about 30 days after consistent use with the maintenance dose. But again, can be an amazing tool depending on when your races and when you need those effects by. And then the one thing I will just kind of break down too is one other study that we pulled, and again, we'll share all these resources in the show notes. But they put together a great graphic on creatine stores within the muscle tissue based off of diet. And what's interesting, and or maybe not so surprising, is that vegetarian diet was the lowest containing phosphocreatine in the muscle, whereas an omnivore had slightly more. And these people were not doing any creatine supplement, of course. And then when they started supplementing with creatine, there was an increase. And then if you were supplementing with creatine and carbohydrates and protein, when you consumed your creatine, it appears that carbohydrates and protein consumed alongside your creatine. Did I say that right? Carbohydrates and protein consumed along with your creatine will increase creatine loading even more so. So in terms of time of consumption, it might be more effective actually to consume your creatine if you're on a maintenance dose or one of your doses throughout the day when you are doing maybe a loading phase in your post-recovery shake, right? Because that post-recovery shake should have some protein and carbs in there.
Do you take creatine?
I did, and then I ran out and I have not reordered it. But my husband loves it. He loves it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just kept on the train after my concussion, and I just put 5 grams in my post workout shake every morning. So then I get the protein and the carbs as well with it. So
yeah, I gotta
it's helping.
gotta get back on the bandwagon. I got my dad taking creatine though, and I think that's been helping a lot because I got
my mom.
Oh, good.
For what I mentioned earlier, cognitive issues, but yeah.
I think I started trying to get my dad to supplement with it after I read some stuff talking about like aging. Well, as I mentioned with the postmenopausal group too, but men and women utilizing creatine as they're aging delayed their lean mass losses.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good one to have on board for him. So now I just got to convince my mom next. We'll see. So let's see, I'll break down a little bit of the research when it comes to creatine monohydrate. We mentioned kind of the effects that we see already, but I will also add that, again, creatine being something that we already get from our animal protein sources naturally, that when they did look at creatine consistent supplementation for up to 5 years, they saw 0 negative side effects, which is really cool. And they looked at teens, they looked at pregnant women, they looked at adults, they followed them all along utilizing creatine for a long period of time. And again, it appeared perfectly safe for all those populations, which is really cool. But the one thing I did want to break down is that there is such a thing apparently as a creatine responder, a creatine quasi-responder, and a creatine non-responder. And I will say that this research is pulled from a small study. So it was done and solely on men. So they looked at only 11 males. And so ideally we'd love to see a larger study done on this, right? To really confirm that this applies to the population as a whole. But they had never utilized creatine before. They had them all start supplementing with creatine, and they ended up finding of these 11 males, only 3 of them had a phosphocreatine muscle increase by 27%. Then they had another 5 increased by only 13%, and then the remaining 3 by only 4%. And that's how they broke them into a responder, a quasi-responder, and a non-responder. And so they took that study a little bit further and ended up actually sampling their muscle. So they took a biopsy of their muscle, and they determined that those who had the largest percentage of type 2 muscle fibers were the best at basically loading with creatine. So I think that might be a statistic you might be able to get. I don't think many people are going to want to go out and get their muscle biopsied. I've heard it can be a little bit like not super fun, but
I heard it's not fun.
Yeah. But you might be able to get those results from like 23andMe and some genetic testing places. Sometimes they tell you if you have higher or lower percentages of certain types of muscle fibers. Or you could test certain efforts, right? And see if you're able to sustain those, before, I don't know, you need it to load after 30 days, right? So if you're doing a maintenance dose, so I would test, a couple months apart, a similar situation to see. So, and then any other thoughts on creatine before I dive into
Let's hop into the next one.
All right. Our next one, I think many of you are familiar with. It is good old caffeine. Caffeine is proven time and time again to improve our endurance capacity and our time to fatigue. And many times the research will look at they call it an anhydrous caffeine. So it's put in a pill or a powder, but it is the same caffeine molecule that we're looking at that comes in a cup of coffee that, again, many of you are probably familiar with. And it works by this, delaying that time to fatigue because it is interfering with these adenosine, essentially fatigue receptors in the brain, and basically blocking the adenosine from binding in these receptors that would tell us that we're tired. So it's we're kind of being fooled that we're tired. So it's keeping us essentially more alert, right? So this will allow us, again, to have a kind of lower perceived effort while running the same pace or cycling at the same pace. It should feel a little bit easier. It doesn't always necessarily mean that you're going to go faster, though. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's just the effort will feel easier. So with the first study, I'll break it down in much of the literature will look many times at pretty high doses of caffeine. I mean, I think they're high for me personally. But they're looking at like 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram dose. So if that's a 150-pound person, that's 200 to 400 milligrams of caffeine consumed. So that's equivalent to like 2 to 4 cups of coffee. That might be normal.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I thought it was a lot as well. So, and again, that's body weight dependent. So
yeah.
Keep that in mind. But the first study actually looked at 100 to 300 milligram caffeine dose consumed during exercise, and they started consuming it into the exercise session about 15 or even up to 80 minutes into the activity. And it ended up improving the cycling time trial performance by anywhere from 3 to 7%, depending on the time they dosed at. So that was a good one to look at. And then for the shorter duration stuff, we do see with caffeine supplementation, when we're doing repeat high effort sprint work, that when you consume that 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram dose, 50 to 60 minutes prior to exercise, there is increase in that performance by about 3% or more in specifically power output and peak power output. So again, those might be high doses for many of you, but timing is key here. We do know that caffeine can take anywhere from 50 to 60 minutes to get peak in your system. So if you're consuming it from like a gel, a pill, the one caveat being caffeinated gum can get into your system in about 30 minutes. So it's a little bit different because it actually gets to bypass the liver in a sense, because it's actually starting to get absorbed it's called the buccal cavities of your mouth.
Yeah.
So I know, do you have any clients that use the caffeine gum?
No, I have tried the run gum, and I would take it 30 minutes before my runs.
Oh, okay.
And Yeah. I mean, I like it just because I'm not able to drink coffee before I run. It upsets the GI system. So I actually really liked the Run Gum. I just kind of ran out and didn't order anymore, but it's, you know, if you cannot drink coffee or you don't prefer the caffeinated gels, I think that it's a really good option for athletes.
Yeah. That I had a client who he was doing kind of short, fast races, and they were longer than 30 minutes, but he didn't want to do a whole lot of fueling during. So, and I think they were less than 60 minutes. So kind of right in there. And he would start chewing the gum right from the beginning during the race. So different options for different clients. So many times, obviously, if it's a longer duration, you need to fuel. So you're going to have to ditch that gum at some point.
I do run into a lot of clients, especially my marathoners, that think that it's smart to save their caffeinated gel for like the last gel that they take. They think that, you know, oh, well, that caffeine is going to get me to the finish line. But really, you know, it's quite opposite of, you know, that caffeine is going to peak after you're done with your
Make sure you take
so you want to time it strategically. I always have them, you know, have their pre-race gel. If you're taking a gel, you know, 20 minutes before the gun goes off, have that one be caffeine and then alternate. So then you're getting another one mid race if it is a longer race. So then you'll still feel the effects of the caffeine. It'll be peaking towards the end of your race.
Yeah. I think that's something that many people run into too. I've seen that in the triathlon world, where they'll like do a caffeinated something at like T1 and then, you know, go through the whole bike, but then they won't do another one till T3, and it's been 3 hours, and, you know, the caffeine actually can peak and then come out of your system, and then they just feel like super lethargic by the time they get to T2. So you know, keeping that in mind, that if you do start with caffeine, you want to keep it consistently coming into your system too, is the other piece of it. Because once you run out, or you start too early and you run out, then you start to feel super lethargic by the end, which you don't want. Caffeine's a fun one.
And if you are sensitive to caffeine, don't front load. I made this mistake because I do like caffeine when I, you know, during exercise, before and during exercise, but I am sensitive. And I think I took, it was 2 Martin gels back to back.
Oh, wow.
I was on a bike ride and my eye like started twitching.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I was like, I couldn't focus. It was crazy. So be careful, know your limits, know how sensitive you are. And, you know, you can always overdo it.
Yeah. And caffeine is not although we see that there's improvements in performance here, there's other things to consider if you're going to use caffeine, especially when you're racing. One of them being GI issues, and the other one being, does it increase your anxiety? Right. And if it's increasing your anxiety before a race, you don't need, like, I would opt out of the caffeine and try something else here that we're going to talk about today. You know, and you definitely don't want, additional GI issues because of caffeine use. So just being mindful of that stuff, and it might not be the cure all for everybody. So test well before your race week, right? Or race day. Okay. The last supplement we're going to dive in today is Beta-Alanine. And then just as a reminder, if you guys want to get a little cheat sheet of today's information, just click that link in the show notes and you'll get a free download of all this stuff. So I'm going to let Kristin dive into Beta-Alanine. That's another hot topic that's out.
It is. Now that I'm studying for the CISSN, there's a lot of research on this one out lately, recent research. And, it definitely has its benefits when it comes to improving high intensity exercise performance. So basically, beta-alanine is a non-essential amino acid, and your body uses it to produce carnosine, which is a dipeptide comprised of the amino acid histidine and beta-alanine, naturally occurring in large amounts in your skeletal muscles. So basically, carnosine is one of the primary muscle buffering substances available in skeletal muscles. So what it does is it reduces lactic acid accumulation in your muscles during exercise. And we all know that that will lead to improved athletic performance if, we're able to exercise for longer without getting that dreaded feeling of the lactic acid buildup. Especially during high intensity efforts. So going to the research, studies have demonstrated that taking beta-alanine orally over a 28-day period was effective in increasing carnosine levels. So basically what that does is it increases work capacity and decreases your time to fatigue, which in turn equates to strength gains as well as improvement in athletic performance.
So it's kind of like creatine, right? You're trying to, like beta-alanine's increasing carnosine, whereas creatine's increasing phosphocreatine. So you're trying to saturate, and it's also a 28-day period to saturate. So similar to the creatine, which is 30. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically studies have indicated that beta-alanine can, increase the number of reps you can do. It can help increase lean body mass, attenuate neuromuscular fatigue, and as well as increase training volume. And so it has been shown to be most effective in open-end point task time trials that last 1 to 4 minutes in duration. So think of, potentially a longer sprint on a bike, or like an 800-meter dash is usually around, well, it depends on how fast you are, but somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes. So those shorter exercise bursts, that's where it's shown to be most effective. As far as the dosage, 4 to 6 grams a day has been shown to increase carnosine concentration by 64% after 4 weeks. And that same dose of 4 to 6 grams a day has been shown to increase carnosine levels by 80% after 10 weeks, which is huge.
Yeah.
And so at minimum, I would say at least wait 2 to 4 weeks before you potentially see any benefit with supplementing with that 4 to 6 grams. And it is one of those supplements that you can keep taking on a daily basis. And, I think the more consistently you take it over a longer period of time, the more beneficial it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And then with that one too, I've gotten clients where they take it and then they'll message me and be like, they'll kind of go into a panic because they get tingles. So they get the tingles in like the neck or the face or in the hands. And like you mentioned, I mean, one of the things it's doing is it's beta-alanine too can also be a vasodilator, kind of like the beet product, right? It can open up those blood vessels. So when it's opening up those blood vessels, the small blood vessels in the hands and the neck and stuff, you're feeling basically the blood flow get into those areas. And some people get scared about that, but that's actually normal and okay. And you didn't overdose. You don't, you're okay. That it's called paresthesia, and that is okay to get from beta-alanine.
Yeah. And a lot of times, if you just take a little bit lower of a dose, maybe half of the dose, or if you're using a sustained release formula, that can tend to help. So you're not getting that full, dose at one time. I know Thorne is sustained release formula. I don't know about any of the other ones, but
yeah, that's a good one to use. So that's it on our supplements for today. I think as I mentioned, we'll share a little free download for you guys with our favorite brands that we recommend that will give you the dosing that we talked about based off the literature today for these performance benefits. Again, click that link in the show notes to grab that download. And then again, we'll mention dosing, time of day to take, what's the benefits are essentially from that thing, all that fun stuff for you guys to help you with your performance. And then let us know if you give them a try. Remember, some of these like beta-alanine benefits can take 2 to 4 weeks, if not 10 weeks. Creatine takes at least 30 days to saturate that muscle tissue. So just keep in mind, if you're going to use any of these, that just taking creatine once in a blue moon or beta-alanine once in a blue moon, you might not notice any benefits essentially there. So make sure you follow the proper dosing protocol that's shown to be effective in the literature is really what we're trying to get at here, and choose a high quality supplement.
Do your research, or work with a qualified professional. So
absolutely. Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kristin, for breaking that down for us today. So. And for those of you guys listening, if there's any topics, questions you guys have, feel free to always put them in our comment section. If you guys want to hear podcasts on different things, let us know. We will be more than happy to do our research and record something on that topic for you guys. So thanks again, and like and subscribe. It really helps us. Leave a comment on our Apple or whatever it's called stuff. It helps the podcast. So we appreciate you guys. All right.